this for Whitney.
I'd really appreciate seeing a friendly face.
I can't. I'm just about to go to bed. Excited for the big adventure?
You know what to say if the Mitchells come knocking, do you?
It's Whitney. She's gone.
Can they escape before it's too late? EastEnders, next week on BBC One and iPlayer.
Tonight's match of the day 2 has highlights from 2 Premier League games as second-place Manchester United took on Burnley and Arsenal were at home to Fulham. We'll also bring you the second FA Cup semi-final between Leicester and Southampton. There's also all the weekend's other goals, so join us after the news.
At 10 o'clock, the BBC News, now on BBC One Wales with Clyde Myrie and Rhiannon Wilkins.
Tonight at 10, international condemnation of Russia after the 2 suspects in the Salisbury nerve agent poisonings are linked to a deadly explosion in the Czech Republic. 2 men died in the blast in 2014, once declared an accident. The suspects are thought to be agents working for Russian military intelligence. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, says the Czech revelations show a disturbing pattern of behaviour by Moscow. Also tonight, football chiefs warn Europe's top clubs not to join a new Super League after reports of an announcement on a breakaway tournament. From the favelas to the farmlands, how a divided Brazil is failing to tackle coronavirus. And preparing for liftoff, the revolutionary NASA helicopter set to hover above the surface of Mars. Good evening. There's been international condemnation of Russia after the 2 men suspected of carrying out the Salisbury nerve agent attack 3 years ago were implicated in a deadly explosion in the Czech Republic in 2014. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, says the revelation shows a disturbing pattern of behavior by Moscow, while the White House has criticized what it says are subversive actions by the Russian state. Czech officials are now expelling 18 Russian diplomats, a move Moscow says is absurd, and in retaliation is now expelling 20 Czech diplomats. Here's our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera.
The aftermath of a deadly explosion. In October 2014, this arms depot in the Czech countryside blew up. It took a month to find the remains of 2 men who worked there. It was widely assumed to have been an accident, until now. A key piece of evidence came when investigators found an email requesting permission for 2 men to inspect the site. Attached were scans of the men's passports, a copy of which the BBC has obtained. If you recognise them, this is why. They're the same 2 men wanted in connection with the Salisbury poisoning in the UK. In 2018, they were spotted on CCTV and accused of smearing nerve agent on the front door of Sergei Skripal's house. The 2 denied any involvement, saying they visited Salisbury to see the cathedral spire. The email with the passport scans claimed the men were from the National Guard of Tajikistan and gave false names. The pair arrived in Prague on October 11th, using the same names as in Salisbury. On October 13th, they went to stay on Ostrava, near the arms depot, and they left the country on October 16th, the day of the explosion. But why was the depot targeted? The BBC has been told that a Bulgarian arms dealer, Emilian Gebrev, stored weapons there. 6 months later in Bulgaria, members of the same unit of Russian military intelligence are believed to have tried to kill Gebrev. This CCTV shows an alleged member of the team moving around Gebrev's car. Its alleged poison was smeared on its door handle, leaving him fighting for his life, though he did survive.
In that kind of struggle,
one expert says these incidents paint a picture of how this unit operates.
It actually seems to be military intelligence's kind of in-house team of miscellaneous throat slitters and general saboteurs. It's probably about 20 operational staff and maybe 200 support personnel.
The Czech Prime Minister has announced 18 Russian diplomats are being expelled. The issue will be discussed by EU foreign ministers tomorrow, while in London the Foreign Secretary said the UK stood by its Czech allies in exposing Russia's dangerous operations. Moscow says the allegations about its role in this explosion are unfounded and far-fetched, but investigations into the activities of Russian military intelligence are ongoing, and more cases may still be uncovered, raising the pressure on Moscow further. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Sarah Rainsford is in Moscow for us tonight. Sarah, this then is the latest condemnation of Russia in recent days for malign actions.
Yeah, it's been quite a week for Russia's relations with the West. It's not just the Czechs who've been expelling Russian diplomats, the Americans and the Poles have done it too, and the US have imposed more sanctions against Russia this week too. All of it, of course, meant to change the way that the Kremlin is thinking. But Moscow has mirrored all of those moves and more, and the political mood here feels increasingly tense. There is still, of course, that Russian troop deployment to Ukraine's border, and the sense perhaps that Moscow is warning what it might do if pushed. And Russia is still insisting that it's the West that's aggressive, trying to impose its agenda here inside Russia. So there's been a real crackdown inside the country against Vladimir Putin's political opponents. Alexei Navalny, the key one, of course, is still in prison, and he's been on a hunger strike now for 19 days. His opponents are warning that his life is hanging by a thread. They've called a protest for Wednesday. That's shaping up to be a key day. President Vladimir Putin will make his State of the Nation address on Wednesday, and that could give us some indications of whether this downward spiral will continue.
Sarah, thank you. Sarah Rainsford there in Moscow. The Premier League and UEFA have warned any club thinking of joining a new European Super League that they'll be banned from all other competitions. There are reports that an announcement could be made soon about plans for the formation of a breakaway tournament. Boris Johnson says such proposals would be very damaging for football. Well, our sports editor Dan Rowan is outside Old Trafford for us tonight. Dan, what more do we know about this apparent Super League?
Well, Clive, if this were to happen, it has the potential to end the club game as we know it. The so-called Big Six of English club football, Manchester United here, but also Manchester City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal and Spurs, all understood to be on the verge tonight of announcing that they are in principle supportive of a possible European Super League that would see them become permanent members of a new competition alongside Italian and Spanish clubs initially, in return for hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, will it happen? Because in the past, this threat of a breakaway has regularly been used by the big clubs to get more money, more power from UEFA. And it's surely no coincidence that tomorrow UEFA are due to announce a new revamped, enlarged Champions League format. And it would be no surprise if this was a negotiation tactic ahead of that. It's been widely condemned tonight by everyone from the likes of the Prime Minister, former players, former managers like Sir Alex Ferguson, fan groups, the government, but also UEFA, who said that the clubs would be punished, they'd be barred from domestic and European club competition, the Premier League, who said that they wouldn't sanction it, the players involved may be barred from playing for their countries. It's being seen as a power grab motivated by greed. But whatever the motivation and whether it happens or not, one thing's certain, it has reinforced this sense of division and also questions over really where power lies in the game now.
Dan, thank you for that. Dan Rowan there at Old Trafford. The first weekend since the latest easing of COVID lockdown restrictions in England has seen millions take the opportunity to get outdoors and enjoy the sunny weather. But there are concerns over new variants of the coronavirus, with 77 cases discovered in England and Scotland of an Indian mutation of the coronavirus. With the latest, here's our health correspondent, Catherine Burns.
As steps along the roadmap go, this one has made a big difference to streets up and down England. It's been the first weekend for non-essential shops to open. Streets packed, and apart from masks and queues, it's almost like old times. Yes. Pubs and restaurants too have had their first weekend of real trade for months. Only outside, but it's not putting people off. Steve and his family are getting together for a big occasion.
It's really great to be able to come out and celebrate my birthday, meet my daughter who I haven't seen for a long time, and just be around other people as well. And there's a buzz.
It's just really lovely to see them and celebrate. It feels a bit more normal as well.
It's nice to be able to just do it now. Even if you have to be cold, it's worth it.
Right now, it can feel like we've all got a lot to celebrate. Infections across the UK have fallen by 90% since the start of the year. They're now at their lowest level since September. Public health officials will keep a close eye on how easing up affects those numbers. But in the meantime, they're also studying a new variant that seems to have come from India. Cases are spiking there, and 77 people in the UK have now tested positive for the new variant. The vast majority have been picked up in routine testing as people isolated after travelling from India, although a few have not been linked to travel.
We have put it as a variant under investigation. To escalate it up the ranking, we need to know that it's increased transmissibility, increased severity, or vaccine evading. And we just don't have that yet, though we're looking at the data on a daily basis.
Meanwhile, as we ease out of restrictions, the NHS is starting to reckon up the cost of the pandemic on patient care. There's a warning it could take between 3 and 5 years to clear waiting lists in the worst areas.
We're going to have to be bold. We're going to have to be transformational. We're going to need to basically change the way that we provide some of this care, but that's going to need the government to come up with extra funding.
The government says, yes, the NHS is facing significant challenges, but is also getting an extra £7 billion funding. Catherine Burns, BBC News.
The latest government figures show there were 1,882 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average the number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 2,555. The number of people in hospital in the UK with coronavirus stands at just over 2,000. 10 deaths were reported. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test, which means, on average, in the past week, 26 deaths were announced every day, taking the total to more than 127,000. Nearly 140,000 people have had their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, taking the overall number of people who've had their first jab to more than 32.75 million, while the number of people who've had their second dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period is nearly 500,000, which takes the overall number who've had their second jab to nearly 10 million. Now, the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, has told the BBC that the government will look at any recommendations to change the rules around lobbying. Inquiries have begun into David Cameron's contact with ministers on behalf of the collapsed financial firm Greensill Capital. Here's our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Letting light into parts of political life that often stay in the shadows. Former Prime Minister David Cameron's lobbying of ministers on behalf of a finance company has led to wider questions about links between government and business and possible conflicts of interest. One cabinet minister who used to work for Mr Cameron defended his actions and those of ministers today, but hinted a government review could bring change.
Once it's concluded, and once all those parliamentary committees that are now looking at this have concluded, I'm sure some of them will make policy recommendations, and of course the government will look at that. I'm not saying that things couldn't be tweaked or improved, but I am saying that it was changed about 10 years ago, and that fundamentally here the question should be really less about who spoke to who. The question is much more, how did ministers act after those conversations?
Conservatives are worried some of this may be starting to stick and could spell trouble for Boris Johnson with voters if he doesn't do something soon.
Boris defeated what he described as an out-of-touch elite in the 2016 referendum and won a general election victory. He is seen as different from his predecessors and has won a lot of support as a consequence. He will lose that support unless he acts decisively now.
Labour's Rachel Reeves faced questions about why her party's former Welsh First Minister took a job against independent advice, but there's no let-up in the political attacks.
What we've seen this week is that Tory sleaze is back and that it's bigger than ever. And we need real change to restore trust in our democracy and in the very essence essence of public service, which matters to so many of us and matters to people in our country.
There are now multiple investigations underway into the rules around contact between politicians in power and those who seek to influence them, including the government's own review. So it's possible, indeed likely, that more details will emerge and be used by some to argue that there are just too many grey areas. What's less clear is whether any of this will lead to lasting change in the way Westminster works. How to regulate access to politicians and ensure they're not unduly influenced are not easy questions to answer. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
The estimated number of people around the world who've died due to coronavirus has now topped 3 million, with the highest number in America, followed by Brazil, Mexico and India. In Brazil, so far, more than 370,000 people have died, but President Bolsonaro refuses to order a lockdown despite continuing infections. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has sent us this report from Sao Paulo.
Every day, the faces of despair multiply. The food lines in Sao Paulo's largest favela go on and on. With most here working in the grey economy, queues have more than tripled as COVID takes lives and livelihoods of Brazil's poorest. For Luciana Firmino and her family, this is their only meal of the day. She lost her job in a manicure studio with the pandemic, and they're unable to pay the rent.
I've lost hope. We will have to live on the street or under a bridge soon. Sometimes I think I should give my children away to social services.
It feels like a different country among the rich farmers and backers of the president. Harvesting the corn, Frederico Davila says Bolsonaro is cutting through a corrupt establishment. But with his hostility to lockdowns, slow vaccine purchase, and Brazil shrouded by over 365,000 deaths, the president's critics call his handling genocidal.
President Bolsonaro is not focused in killing anyone. He wants to preserve the liberties of the people. He wants people to get out, to get work.
The cost of that is the second worst death toll in the world and a hospital collapse.
No, it's not true, because these 365,000, we don't know if they are died by corona.
To understand President Bolsonaro's support, even after the awful toll of the pandemic here, just look at his inspiration, Donald Trump. Both paint themselves as anti-establishment, both captured the populist mood, and both, despite mismanaging the pandemic, have kept their devoted following, from the wealthy farmers to the conservative base. Blasting out his message are the evangelicals, streaming part samba, part sermon. Online is key to rallying the Bolsonaro faithful. They back the president's push to reopen churches.
The church votes in favor of Bolsonaro because he defends the family. He's against abortion and school books promoting LGBT groups. He fights for Brazil with Christian values. And if he doesn't want to wear a mask, that's his right to choose.
With a divisive president and a virus and poverty exploding, Brazil faces a perfect storm. They're preaching to the converted here, but increasingly for this devastated country, they're empty words. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Sao Paulo.
Now, with all the sport, here's Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, Ollie.
Evening to you, Clive. There have been some big cup games in England and Scotland. Highlights are coming up after the news, but stay right there if you'd like some of the headlines. Leicester have reached their first FA Cup final for over 50 years. They beat Southampton 1-0. A few thousand fans were allowed into Wembley, as was our sports correspondent, Joe Wilson.
They're back, cautiously and limited in numbers, local residents mainly, but supporters in the broader sense of football. Anna's a student who lives near Wembley, holding a ticket to an experiment.
I'm 19 myself, so I'm one of the people who's lowest at risk of getting the virus, so I don't mind taking part in something like this. And if it means I get to see a club perform, I'm all for it.
Spectators had to show a negative lateral flow test to get in, keep on face coverings and maintain social distance. After the game, they'll be monitored too.
Did we have the right capacity with the big queues? So
turns out there wasn't. Everything seems to have gone very smoothly so far. One-way systems, hygiene measures, plus importantly that testing that's taking place before and after. And we'll be analysing the data from that very, very carefully.
There are hopes and plans to expand Wembley's permitted attendance in weeks and months to come. Big matches lie ahead. But what about this one? Southampton versus Leicester City took time to get going. Leicester needed the energy of Jamie Vardy and the perseverance of Kelechi Iheanacho to break the stalemate.
Iheanacho is a master finisher these days.
And look, they had friends in the stadium. New supporters or old, well, real live reaction is what football's missed. There could be new winners of this oldest competition. Come on! Leicester in the final. Joe Wilson, BBC News, at Wembley.
Rangers are still on for the double in Scotland after beating their old firm rival Celtic in the Scottish Cup. A month after securing the league title, Stephen Gerrard's side won 2-0 at Ibrox to reach the quarter-finals, where they'll face St Johnstone. Hibs also won today. We've had 14 ties in the Women's FA Cup today. There was a West Midlands derby as Birmingham City women beat Coventry United ladies 5-1 at Solihull. Sarah Mayling scored twice to see them reach the last 16. The second Formula One Grand Prix of the season had it all, a huge crash and a brilliant drive from Lewis Hamilton to make it onto the podium. But it was Max Verstappen's Red Bull that took the checkered flag in Italy. Adam Wilde reports.
Arriving in the sunshine, heading out in the rain. Imola in the springtime, who knows what to expect.
It's lights out and away we go.
Well, reigning champion Lewis Hamilton at the front felt familiar enough, but behind him, the looming threat of Red Bull. That wouldn't stay behind him for long. Hamilton against Max Verstappen. It may be the story of the season, playing out here behind the spray. Keep an eye on that weather, though. The rain was slowly going. The chaos coming at pace. A rare mistake from Lewis Hamilton took him into the gravel. He would make it back out eventually. Unlike his teammate Valtteri Bottas colliding with George Russell's Williams. Bad enough to stop the race. Some time then for recriminations.
What was he doing, honestly?
And some reflection. But with the dust settled, the track cleared. Hamilton incredibly raced back to second. Verstappen, though, wouldn't be caught. A race from which no one knew what to expect. Ultimately, had it all. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
Much more, of course, on the BBC Sport website, including details of another good day for Mark Cavendish in Turkey. Clive.
Ollie, thank you for that. Now, it's nearly 180 million miles away from Earth, but this little helicopter could make history tomorrow by attempting the first powered flight on another planet. These are images sent back from Mars of the craft in